Get that disabled girl and her special swimsuit out of our pool. It violates our dress code." Those were the exact words Victoria Reynolds, our HOA president, screamed at my sister Melissa in front of everyone at our community pool. Then she physically shoved my 74-year-old father when he tried to defend her. What Victoria didn't know, I'm TJ Harrington, CEO of the management company that employed her. The look on her face when I fired her and the entire board the next day was absolutely priceless. If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA tyrant, you're going to love how this story ends. Looking back, I should have seen the signs that something was wrong with Lakeview Gardens HOA long before the incident. When my sister Melissa moved in with me after her spinal injury from a car accident, we invested heavily in making my home accessible for her wheelchair. From day one, HOA President Victoria Reynolds seemed personally offended by every modification. The wheelchair ramp was an eyesore despite perfectly matching our home's aesthetic. The wider doorways somehow disrupted the architectural harmony of the neighborhood. The accessible garden beds we built were unauthorized landscaping alterations. Victoria was known throughout the community for her immaculate property and iron-fisted rule. In her mid-50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes, she patrolled the neighborhood like a military commander, clipboard in hand, documenting violations with almost predatory delight. Her favorite phrase, "The bylaws clearly state," followed by whatever obscure rule she was weaponizing that day. What Victoria didn't know was that I, Thomas Harrington, wasn't just an ordinary homeowner. In professional settings, I go by TJ Harrington, CEO of Nationwide Community Management Group, the very company contracted to provide management services to over 300 HOAs across the state, including Lakeview Gardens. I purchased my home using my full legal name 3 years ago as part of an undercover evaluation program to assess how our management representatives actually treated residents. I wanted authentic experiences, not the polished behavior they'd show if they knew who I was. I'd been documenting Victoria's increasingly aggressive enforcement for months, concerned by reports from other community managers, but I needed to witness it firsthand. I never expected her to target my family so viciously, nor did I anticipate how quickly her mask of professionalism would shatter when challenged. But now she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and she was about to learn exactly who she'd been bullying all these months. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places, and sometimes the person you're treating with contempt is the one person who can end your career with a single phone call. The first incident occurred just 2 weeks after Melissa moved in. I'd installed a temporary ramp while waiting for the custom one that would match our home's exterior. Victoria showed up at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday, knocking so persistently I thought there was an emergency. When I opened the door in my pajamas, she thrust a violation notice at me. "This unauthorized structure must be removed immediately," she announced, not even acknowledging Melissa sitting in her wheelchair behind me. "The Architectural Review Committee hasn't approved this addition." She spat the word like it was distasteful. "Victoria, it's a temporary ramp until the permanent one arrives," I explained calmly. "Melissa can't enter or exit the house without it." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she looked past me at Melissa. "Our bylaws don't make exceptions for personal circumstances, Mr. Harrington. You have 48 hours to remove it or face daily fines." I explained the Americans with Disabilities Act, showing her documentation from Melissa's doctor. Victoria just smiled thinly. "The ADA doesn't supersede our covenants that you signed when purchasing your home. Perhaps you should have considered your situation before moving to Lakeview Gardens." I sent an email to the board that day, copying the property manager assigned to our community. Surprisingly, they approved a temporary variance for 30 days, coincidentally the exact time frame when the permanent ramp would arrive. I documented everything, adding it to my growing file on Victoria's leadership approach. The second confrontation happened during Melissa's physical therapy sessions. Her therapist visited 3 times weekly, parking in our driveway. After the 4th session, Victoria left a notice on the therapist's windshield claiming commercial services weren't permitted in residential areas. When the therapist showed me the notice, I immediately called Jessica Morales, our community manager. There's nothing in the bylaws prohibiting medical professionals from providing home services, Jessica confirmed, sounding uncomfortable. I'll speak with Victoria. The next day, Victoria appeared at my door again. While your therapist can continue her visits, she said with obvious displeasure, we'll need detailed documentation of her medical credentials, professional insurance, and service schedule for our records. She handed me a form requiring extensive personal medical information about Melissa. This is a violation of medical privacy laws, I said, refusing to take the form. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Then perhaps the therapist should conduct her services elsewhere. She turned to leave but added over her shoulder, by the way, the board has decided to review all disability accommodations quarterly to ensure they remain necessary. The implied suggestion that Melissa's disability might be temporary or exaggerated made my blood boil. That evening, I called our company's legal department, speaking as CEO rather than resident, to discuss disability accommodation requirements for HOAs. I added their guidance to my documentation, knowing it would eventually prove useful. The 3rd incident involved our garden. Gardening had become Melissa's passion during recovery, the one activity where her disability seemed to disappear. I'd built raised beds at wheelchair height so she could tend her plants independently. One afternoon, I returned from work to find Victoria and 2 board members measuring the garden beds. These structures exceed the permitted height for landscape features, Victoria declared when she saw me, and these plants aren't on the approved vegetation list. Melissa had wheeled herself onto the porch, her face falling as she heard Victoria's words. Those are native plants, she said quietly. They're drought-resistant and better for local pollinators. Victoria barely glanced at her. The approved plant list exists for aesthetic consistency, not environmental idealism. The beds need to be lowered and replanted with approved species by next Friday. Board member Alan Peterson, a retired teacher who'd always seemed reasonable, looked uncomfortable. Victoria, perhaps we could make an exception. Exceptions lead to chaos, Alan. Victoria cut him off. Rules exist for everyone. That night, Melissa cried over the garden she'd worked so hard to create. I stayed up late drafting a formal accommodation request, complete with photos, accessibility guidelines, and environmental impact statements about native plants. I submitted it to the full board, bypassing Victoria entirely. 3 days later, Alan called me personally. The board voted to approve your garden as is, he said, sounding genuinely apologetic. Victoria was overruled. Thank you, Alan, I replied. I appreciate your support. He lowered his voice. Between us, several board members are growing concerned about Victoria's zealousness. But she's been president for 5 years, and no one wants to challenge her directly. This was valuable intelligence. I thanked him again and added this interaction to my growing file. Over the next 2 months, Victoria's campaign continued. She cited Melissa for leaving her wheelchair-accessible van in the driveway overnight, despite no rules against it, complained about the grab bars visible through our bathroom window, suggesting we keep blinds closed at all times, and even attempted to prevent Melissa from serving on the community garden committee because meetings were held in the second-floor clubhouse with no elevator. Each time, I carefully documented the incident, gathered supporting evidence, and filed formal responses. I was building a case piece by piece, knowing that eventually it would prove useful. As CEO of the management company, I could have revealed myself and ended this at any time. but I needed comprehensive documentation of the pattern of behavior to ensure systemic change, not just a quick fix. The tensions reached a breaking point when Lakeview Gardens announced their annual summer pool party. Melissa was excited. She'd been taking swimming therapy, and her physical therapist recommended regular swimming as ideal exercise. The invitation specified family-friendly fun and all residents welcome. Melissa spent days finding the perfect adaptive swimwear that would accommodate her mobility needs while still looking stylish. The morning of the pool party arrived bright and hot. I helped Melissa pack her specialized pool bag, complete with the extra equipment she needed for safe water transfers. Her excitement was palpable. This would be her first major community social event since moving in. "Do you think people will stare?" she asked as I helped her into the van. "They'll stare because you look amazing," I assured her, though privately I worried about Victoria's reaction to Melissa's presence. We arrived at the community pool around noon. The party was in full swing, children splashing in the shallow end, adults socializing under umbrellas, music playing from speakers. I found an accessible spot near the pool entry and helped Melissa set up her things. Several neighbors waved and greeted us warmly. Melissa began the careful process of preparing to use the pool lift, a piece of equipment I'd actually had installed at this very pool 2 years ago during a facility upgrade, though no one knew I was behind the decision. I was just about to help Melissa transfer when Victoria's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" She marched toward us in a designer swimsuit cover-up, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, and that ever-present clipboard in hand. Behind her trailed 2 board members looking distinctly uncomfortable. "We're enjoying the pool party," I replied calmly. As the invitation stated, all residents are welcome. Victoria's gaze fixed on Melissa's adaptive swimwear and transfer equipment. "That is not standard pool attire, and that equipment hasn't been approved for use here." I felt my patience thinning. "Victoria, this is medically necessary adaptive equipment. The pool lift was installed specifically for ADA compliance." "The lift is approved," she conceded with obvious reluctance. "But we have dress code standards that all residents must follow. That contraption she's wearing doesn't qualify as standard swimwear." Several nearby conversations stopped as people turned to watch. Melissa's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "This is specialized adaptive swimwear designed for people with mobility challenges," I explained, fighting to keep my voice level. "It serves the same function as any other swimsuit while providing necessary support and features for safe water entry and exit." Victoria pulled out her phone and began taking photos of Melissa. Section 8, Paragraph 4 of Pool Regulations clearly states only standard 1-piece or 2-piece swimwear is permitted. The board will need to review this alternative attire before it can be approved. Tears welled in Melissa's eyes as she reached for a towel to cover herself. "Tom, it's okay," she whispered. "We can leave." "No," I said firmly. "We have every right to be here." Alan stepped forward from behind Victoria. "I don't see any problem with her swimwear, Victoria. It looks perfectly appropriate to me." Victoria turned on him with startling viciousness. "The bylaws don't care about your opinion, Alan. Rules are rules." By now, at least 20 residents were watching the confrontation unfold. Melissa was trying to make herself as small as possible in her wheelchair. The joy of the day completely evaporated. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Victoria Reynolds, to confirm, you're denying my disabled sister access to the community pool because of her medically necessary adaptive swimwear. Is that correct?" Victoria's eyes narrowed at my phone. "Put that away immediately. Recording at the pool is against regulations." "Actually," I countered, "there's nothing in the bylaws prohibiting recording, especially when documenting potential discrimination." I continued filming as Victoria's face flushed with anger. Melissa whispered, "Please, Tom, let's just go. Everyone's staring." She was right. The entire pool area had gone silent. Children stopped splashing. Conversations halted. All eyes were on us, on my sister shrinking into her wheelchair, trying to hide her specialized swimwear beneath a towel, her face burning with humiliation. That's when my father walked up. Dad had driven separately and was running late. At 74, he still carried himself with the dignity of the retired judge he was, though his pace had slowed in recent years. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between Melissa's tearful face and Victoria's rigid stance. Before I could answer, Victoria turned to him dismissively. "Sir, this is a private matter between the HOA and residents. Please step aside." Dad's eyebrows rose. "I'm family, and that gives me standing in this discussion. Now, would someone explain why my daughter is crying?" I started to explain, but Victoria interrupted. "Your daughter is attempting to use community facilities while violating clearly established dress code regulations. I'm simply enforcing the rules everyone agreed to follow." Dad studied Melissa's adaptive swimwear, now partially visible despite the towel. "That appears to be standard medical adaptive equipment. The ADA requires reasonable accommodations." "Don't quote laws to me," Victoria snapped. "I've been managing this community for 5 years. I know our bylaws inside and out." "And I served as a district court judge for 30 years, Dad replied, calmly. "I know discrimination when I see it," the crowd murmured. Victoria's composure slipped further. "This is not discrimination. This is rule enforcement. Rules that have discriminatory impact are still discriminatory," Dad persisted. "Perhaps you should consult with your legal team before—" "Enough!" Victoria stepped forward, jabbing her finger toward Dad's chest. "I will not be lectured in front of residents by someone who doesn't even live here." Dad stood his ground. "The law applies regardless of residency status." Something snapped in Victoria's expression. She stepped forward and did the unthinkable. She shoved my elderly father backward with both hands. Dad, unprepared for the assault, stumbled and would have fallen if not for 2 neighbors who rushed forward to steady him. Gasps echoed around the pool. Even Victoria seemed shocked by her own actions, but quickly recovered. "Security!" she called to the teenage lifeguard who looked completely overwhelmed. "Remove these people from the premises immediately. They're disrupting our community event." Melissa was fully sobbing now, trying to maneuver her wheelchair away from the scene, struggling with trembling hands. I helped Dad to a nearby chair, checking that he wasn't hurt, then turned to Victoria with ice in my voice. "Victoria Reynolds, you just physically assaulted a 74-year-old man in front of dozens of witnesses. That's not just a violation of HOA standards. It's a crime," she scoffed, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "He was being aggressive. I felt threatened. Several residents immediately protested. He was just standing there." "You pushed him, Victoria. We all saw it." "That's elder abuse." The crowd's mood had shifted palpably. Where minutes before they had been uncomfortable spectators, now they were witnesses to an assault, and their sympathies had clearly shifted. Alan and another board member approached Victoria, speaking in urgent whispers. She shook them off. I'm the president of this association. I decide what happens here." I turned to the gathered residents. "My name is Thomas Harrington. My sister Melissa has a right to use this pool with her medically necessary equipment. My father has a right to defend her without being physically assaulted. I'm asking everyone who witnessed what happened here today to email me their accounts." I handed out several business cards, not my CEO cards, but my personal ones. As we gathered our things to leave, Victoria called after us. "This isn't over, Harrington. The board will back me on this." I turned back one last time. "You're right. About one thing, Victoria. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." That evening I made 3 phone calls. The first was to our company's legal department. The second was to our board oversight committee. And the third was to schedule an emergency meeting with all Lakeview Gardens board members for 9 a.m. Monday morning. Victoria had no idea what was coming. Monday morning arrived with a crisp clarity that matched my mood. I selected my best suit, not the casual clothes Victoria was accustomed to seeing me in, and prepared a briefcase with all the documentation I'd been gathering. I'd spent Sunday with our legal team, reviewing every violation of HOA regulations, ADA requirements, and basic ethical standards that Victoria and her board had committed. I arrived at our corporate headquarters downtown 30 minutes early to ensure everything was perfect. The executive conference room had been prepared exactly as I'd requested. Copies of our company's code of conduct on each seat, the disability accommodation guidelines prominently displayed, video equipment set up to record, and our legal team standing by. At 8:45, I received a text from our receptionist. Victoria Reynolds and 4 board members have arrived. They're in the lobby. Perfect. I instructed her to escort them to the small waiting area adjacent to the conference room rather than directly in. Let them stew for a few minutes, wondering why they'd been summoned to the corporate headquarters rather than meeting at the community clubhouse as usual. At precisely 9 a.m., I nodded to my executive assistant, who opened the door and showed the Lakeview Gardens HOA board into the conference room. Victoria entered first, her usual confidence on display, despite being clearly puzzled by the unfamiliar surroundings. She wore a tailored blazer and her trademark pearl necklace, clipboard, clutched to her chest like a shield. Board members Alan Peterson, Diana Williams, Robert Chen, and Gregory Thompson followed behind her, looking varying degrees of confused and uncomfortable. The confusion on their faces deepened when they saw me sitting at the head of the conference table in my executive suit, flanked by our company's general counsel and director of operations. "Thomas," Victoria said, her voice tinged with irritation. "What are you doing here? We received a summons for an emergency meeting with management executives." I smiled politely. "Good morning, Ms. Reynolds. Board members, please take a seat." They hesitantly sat down, exchanging confused glances. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she scanned the room, taking in the formal setup, the legal team, the company logo prominently displayed. "There must be some mistake," she began. "We're supposed to be meeting with—" "There's no mistake," I interrupted, rising to my feet. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. I'm Thomas James Harrington, CEO of Nationwide Community Management Group, the company that employs all of you." The color drained from Victoria's face. Alan gasped audibly. Robert Chen's mouth literally fell open. That's impossible," Victoria stammered. "The CEO is T.J. Harrington. We've seen his signature on company documents." I smiled. "T.J. are my initials. I use them professionally." I reached into my briefcase and withdrew my company ID and business cards, sliding them across the table. "As you can see, we've actually known each other for 3 years. Diana Williams, the board secretary, looked like she might faint. "But why would you live in our community without telling us who you are?" "An excellent question," I replied. 3 years ago, after receiving multiple concerning reports about how certain HOAs were treating residents, our executive team implemented an undercover evaluation program. I personally moved into communities managed by our company to experience firsthand how our representatives treat residents. Lakeview Gardens was my 3rd such assignment. Victoria's shock was quickly morphing into something else. Calculation. I could almost see her mind racing, trying to assess the damage, formulate a defense. "If this is true, you've been deliberately deceptive. You've misrepresented yourself to gain some kind of advantage." I shook my head. "I purchased my home using my legal name. I never once misrepresented myself. I simply observed how our management company's representatives treat residents when they think no one important is watching." I pressed a button on the remote in front of me, and the large screen at the end of the room came to life. The video from Saturday began playing. Victoria confronting Melissa about her adaptive swimwear, the escalating argument, and finally, the moment she shoved my father, captured from multiple angles thanks to the security cameras our company had installed around the pool area. What you're watching is a clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, our company's code of conduct, state laws regarding elder abuse, and frankly, basic human decency. Victoria scrambled to recover. I was simply enforcing the rules. The board approved those pool regulations. I turned to the other board members. Is that true? Did you knowingly approve regulations that violate federal disability law? They shifted, uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at me. Alan finally spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. The dress code policy was presented to us by Victoria as a standard template from your company. We were told it had been legally reviewed. I nodded. And the enforcement of these policies? The handling of accommodation requests? The treatment of residents with disabilities? Victoria assured us everything was being handled according to company guidelines, Robert Chen said, glancing nervously at his president. We rarely saw the actual resident communications. Our general counsel, Sophia Martinez, leaned forward. Ms. Reynolds, did you ever consult with our legal department regarding the adaptive equipment and swimwear accommodations requested by the Harringtons? Victoria's jaw tightened. Such minor operational decisions don't require legal consultation. On the contrary, Sophia replied, opening a folder in front of her. Company policy explicitly requires legal review of all ADA accommodation requests. We have no record of you ever submitting such requests for review. The board members were now openly staring at Victoria, the realization dawning that they'd been kept in the dark. Let me be clear, I said, standing to emphasize my words. What happened Saturday was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a pattern of discriminatory behavior that I've been documenting for months. I distributed thick folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find copies of every interaction I've had with Ms. Reynolds regarding my sister's disability accommodations, along with her responses, my follow-ups, and relevant legal standards. You'll also find similar complaints from 12 other Lakeview Gardens residents with disabilities or elderly family members, collected by our resident services team over the past year. Victoria's face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. This is entrapment. You moved into our community under false pretenses to set me up. No, Ms. Reynolds. I moved in to evaluate our management practices. You set yourself up by choosing to discriminate against vulnerable residents and creating a hostile living environment through selective and punitive rule enforcement. I turned to the other board members. I understand that as volunteer board members, you relied on the management company's representative, Ms. Reynolds, to guide you in legal compliance matters. That's why today's actions will distinguish between those who actively participated in discrimination and those who were simply misled. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Whatever you think you're doing, you can't just... Ms. Reynolds, Sophia interrupted, her voice sharp with authority. I suggest you sit down and listen very carefully to what happens next. Surprisingly, Victoria complied, though the look on her face could have melted steel. Effective immediately, I continued, Victoria Reynolds is terminated from her position as community manager of Lakeview Gardens and from all employment with Nationwide Community Management Group. I slid a document across the table toward her. This termination is for cause specifically violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, elder abuse as documented in Saturday's incident, falsification of company documents, failure to follow company procedures regarding legal review, and creating significant legal liability for both the HOA and our management company. Victoria stared at the termination letter, her hands shaking slightly. You can't do this. I've managed Lakeview Gardens for 5 years. The community depends on me. Actually, I replied, I can, and I have. I turned to address the board members. As for the board's future, we have 2 options. Option 1, the entire board resigns immediately, and we appoint an interim board until proper elections can be held. Option 2, those board members who wish to continue serving undergo comprehensive training on ADA compliance, fair housing laws, and ethical governance, and commit to implementing significant reforms. Alan was the first to speak. I'd like to continue serving with proper training. I've suspected things weren't right for some time, but didn't have the courage to challenge Victoria directly. I apologize for that failure. Diana and Robert quickly echoed his sentiment. Only Gregory, Victoria's most loyal ally on the board, remained silent, his arms crossed defensively. Very well, I said. Those wishing to remain on the board will begin training next week. Mr. Thompson, I'll need your decision by the end of business today. Victoria finally found her voice again. This isn't over, Harrington. I have documentation of my own. Every instruction I received, every approval from your company executives, I was following established procedures. I smiled. I welcome your evidence, Ms. Reynolds. Our legal team will review everything as part of our internal investigation. If others in our organization encouraged or facilitated discrimination, they'll face the same consequences you're facing today. And what about the assault charges? She demanded. Are you threatening me with criminal prosecution to force my silence? That's entirely up to my father, I replied calmly. As a former judge, he understands the legal system better than most. He'll decide whether to press charges based on his own judgment, not mine. Victoria gathered her things, her movement stiff with suppressed rage. You'll regret this, Harrington. I have friends in this industry, connections. One last thing, before you go, I said, sliding another document across the table. This is a formal apology letter to my sister, acknowledging the discrimination she experienced and the public humiliation you subjected her to. Signing it is entirely voluntary, but might demonstrate genuine remorse that could influence how other matters proceed. Victoria stared at the letter, then at me, then back at the letter. For a moment I thought I glimpsed something like shame in her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Without another word, she turned and walked out, leaving the apology unsigned. After she left, the atmosphere in the room changed palpably. The remaining board members seemed to exhale collectively. What happens now? Alan asked. Effective immediately, Jessica Morales from our office will serve as interim community manager. The pool dress code and all other discriminatory policies will be immediately revised to comply with ADA regulations. An accessibility audit will be conducted for all community facilities. And most importantly, a formal apology will be issued to all residents who have faced discrimination, starting with my sister. Diana raised her hand tentatively. Did you really live among us for 3 years just to evaluate our HOA? I smiled. My home in Lakeview Gardens was purchased as part of the evaluation program, yes. But I fell in love with the community, not the HOA, but the people, my neighbors. That's why this matters so much. Communities thrive when everyone feels welcome and valued. As the meeting concluded and the board members filed out, looking dazed but somewhat relieved, Sophia stayed behind. You know she'll try to fight this, she said when we were alone. I nodded. Let her try. We have documentation of every incident, witness statements from Saturday, and video evidence of assault. But more importantly, we have the truth. Sophia smiled. So, CEO Harrington, will you be moving to another community for your next undercover assignment? I laughed. No, I think my undercover days are over, but there are 299 other communities in our portfolio that could use a thorough evaluation. I'm thinking of expanding the program with properly trained evaluators this time. That evening, I called Melissa. "It's done," I told her. "How did she take it?" she asked. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied. "But she's gone and things are going to change now." "Good," Melissa said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Does this mean I can wear my adaptive swimwear to the pool without starting an international incident?" "Absolutely. In fact, how about we try again this weekend? I hear the new interim community manager is very accommodating." Melissa laughed, a sound I hadn't heard enough lately. "It's a date." The transformation of Lakeview Gardens over the following months was remarkable. With Jessica Morales as the new community manager and a board that had undergone intensive training, our neighborhood became a model of inclusivity. The pool rules were completely rewritten with proper legal review. Adaptive equipment was installed throughout community spaces, and monthly social events were designed to be accessible to everyone. Victoria did try to fight her termination, filing complaints with various agencies and even threatening a lawsuit for wrongful termination. But faced with overwhelming evidence and multiple witness statements from the pool incident, her efforts quickly collapsed. Last I heard, she'd moved to a retirement community in the next county. Ironically, the very type of living situation she'd once suggested might be more appropriate for my family. The most surprising change came from Gregory Thompson, Victoria's former ally on the board. After initially refusing to commit to the training program, he approached me 3 weeks later with a handwritten apology. "My wife has MS," he confessed. "I was so afraid of someone treating her the way Victoria treated your sister that I went along with everything she said. I was a coward." He not only completed the training, but became our most passionate advocate for accessibility improvements. 3 months after the incident, we held a community pool party to celebrate the completion of extensive accessibility upgrades. Melissa was the guest of honor, cutting the ribbon on the new zero-entry access ramp that complemented the existing pool lift. More than 100 residents attended, many apologizing for not speaking up sooner about Victoria's behavior. The most satisfying moment came that day when Melissa swam her first complete lap using her adaptive equipment, cheered on by neighbors who had become genuine friends. No one cared about her specialized swimwear, no one stared at her scars. They just celebrated her accomplishment with sincere joy. Dad decided not to press assault charges against Victoria, feeling that losing her career and reputation was sufficient consequence. "Sometimes mercy teaches a better lesson than punishment," he said, though he made sure the incident was documented with local authorities in case she ever sought similar employment elsewhere. As for me, I've become more open about my role as CEO, though most neighbors still just treat me as Tom from Maple Drive. I've implemented systematic changes at Nationwide Community Management Group, with regular undercover evaluations now conducted by trained staff across all our properties. Victoria's case is used in our training programs as an example of how not to manage a community. The real victory wasn't getting revenge on Victoria, satisfying as that was. The real win was transforming a toxic environment into a thriving community where people look out for each other instead of policing each other's lives. Yesterday, I received a handmade card signed by over 100 Lakeview Gardens residents, thanking me for the positive changes. I keep it displayed in my home office, next to a photo of Melissa smiling in her adaptive swimwear, enjoying the pool that she had every right to use all along. If you've ever faced discrimination or bullying from those in positions of power, remember this: document everything, know your rights, and stand your ground. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it comes, it's all the sweeter for the wait.